Welcome to episode number 19 of the Brave Widow Show. Today I talk with Sheyna James, who really is a woman after my own heart. She loves leadership, she loves serving others, and she's a real go-getter. I think you are absolutely going to love Sheyna's story and some of the bits of wisdom that she has to share with us today. So let me introduce her. Sheyna James is extremely transparent and authentic. She has overcome tragic loss and uses that time of her life to help others who are going through difficult times to discover God's unique purpose and divine destiny as disciples of Jesus Christ. She was a widow and single mom of 2 boys for 13 years and recently was blessed to find love again. She is now married to Anthony James, and they are a blended family with 6 children. Sheyna is a certified coach, speaker, and trainer with John Maxwell team and the owner of Top Dots digital marketing agency. You can find Sheyna at all of her links, which we'll include in the show notes, as well as at sheynajamesconsulting.com. All right, let's dive in. I can't wait for you to hear her story. Welcome to the Brave Widow podcast. I'm your host, Emily Jones. We help young widows heal their heart, find hope, and dream again for the future. All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Brave Widow Show. Sheyna, I am so glad that you've joined me here today. Excited. So thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you, Emily, so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Well, for our listeners and our viewers, I think Sheyna and we connected several weeks ago and nerded out, I'm pretty sure, about John Maxwell and his material. So if you're also a fellow John Maxwell fan, you can nerd out with us as well at some point. But Sheyna, people are not here for that. Why don't you share a little bit about your background and what you do, and then we can dive into your story.
Yeah, so actually, I have a very diverse background. I consider myself to be a little bit rare. I have a degree in electrical engineering. I have a master's in business and a master's of divinity. I pastor a church in San Jose, California. And then I also do executive coaching, speaking, and training for leaders in corporations, public and private entities all over the world.
And you look fantastic as you're doing that too. So,
well, thank you.
Yeah, I remember when I was speaking with you, just how impressed I was at how much you've accomplished. And I think about, especially a lot of the younger or newer widows that I get to speak with, and they're really, those first few months and year, you're kind of in a haze. Like, how am I going to survive this? How can I ever laugh again? How can I be excited about the future? And so I'm really encouraged to be able to allow you to share your story so that people can see how that transformation is possible, and maybe for them even to be able to work with you or learn more from you about what that looked like. So why don't you tell us a little bit about, if you want to start even at the beginning with how you met your spouse or what your relationship was like? I think people would love to know.
Yeah, so my husband Jeff was my best friend. We started off, I met him when I was 21 years old, and he was my Bible study teacher. And we connected immediately. We started doing work in the community. We were friends for 5 years, never dated. And then one day he got down on one knee in front of a room full of girls that I was leading in a workshop. It was 60 girls. He gets down on one knee. They're all yelling and screaming. I can't hear him. I just see the ring and I'm like, whatever it is, yes. So we basically had a community style relationship, which means everybody in the circle that we were serving, a lot of high school, college age students, were just like a part of the process. They were bridesmaids, groomsmen. And then we were married and had married 6 months later, 2 years later, had our first son. And then 2.5 years later, had our second. So, I mean, life was just amazing. I mean, it was everything that I hoped it would be. He was pastoring the church. We were running a nonprofit in the community. My favorite thing at the time, basketball. So I was coaching basketball. We were running a basketball league. We were helping kids get off the street who were in gangs and helping them just come to know Jesus and transform their lives. So it was really an amazing experience. Really, really.
Oh, that is so incredible. So on the nonprofit work, you worked with some of the youth that was there in the city?
Well, I mean, we worked with high school and college age students. Many of them were kind of not doing anything with their lives, but they just loved basketball. So they would come hang out with us, and then we would in order to play, it wasn't a fee. You had to attend a workshop. And there we taught life skills. We were able to help them to come to know Jesus in some cases. And then from that is how we started our church. We found a lot of those kids were giving their life to Christ, but they didn't know where to go. They were like, we don't feel comfortable. So we had a church where you could show up in your flip flops, your sweatpants, your pajamas if you wanted to, and learn about Jesus. And that was the founding of our church, which it'll be 23 years old this year, actually.
Oh, that is so amazing. And that's one of the things that I think is almost rare now, is to find churches that are really active out in the community, that are really reaching out to people and making them feel comfortable to be there. Like, churches are generally filled with broken people. And
Yes.
sometimes we think perfect people are in church, but a lot of the times it's because we know that we need help. So it's great to see that you guys were so active in the community that you were able to build your own church together. How long were you married before you ended up losing him?
So we were married for 7 years. It was about a month shy of our 8-year anniversary. And what happened was it was a normal Sunday morning. I wake up and I hear the sounds of giggling and laughter in my bed. My 2-year-old at the time was just laughing, and I heard his daddy say, "Gobi, give me some sugar." And so he was laughing, and they rubbed noses together like Eskimo kisses. And my younger son was like, "Skimos, daddies, more skimos," meaning more Eskimo kisses. And so I was just in the bed saying to myself, I'm the most blessed woman in the world. I mean,
Mm.
really, to have a great husband, to have two amazing children. And my husband said, "Hey, you know what? Get some rest. I'm going to go ahead and get the kids together, take them to church." And so he took them to church that morning. And when we got to church, my husband preached this fiery message. It was like, get up and get in the game and serve. And he was like, I'm gonna preach. Somebody's gonna hear about Jesus today. And I was like, come on through, baby boy. He's like preaching. And after he came out of the pulpit, he came to me and he said, "You know what? I kind of feel like I have to throw up." And I was like, "Well, go ahead, take care of yourself. I'm going to come back and check in on you in a little bit." And about 15 minutes later, I went in and I found my husband completely just unconscious on the ground. And I was like, "What is happening?" And so we quickly called 911. They came and they rushed him to the hospital. And when I get to the hospital, the doctor comes out and he says, "Mrs. Hurd, I'm sorry to tell you, but your husband has passed away." And I'm like, what just happened? It was literally less than an hour from the time he preached that sermon that the doctor said that to me. And I was like, God, I don't know what I'm going to do. I did get on my knees in that moment because I had lost my mom and my dad at that point, and I had been angry in the past so much. But in that moment, I got on my knees and I said, "Lord, I still love you. Lord, I still trust you. And Lord, I'll still serve you."
Mm.
But it took me a while. It took me a while because I had been to grave sites and that was just hard for me. It took me a while to kind of go to the grave where he was buried. And during that time, it was about 6 months. During that time, I felt like I was walking in a haze. I felt like all my hopes, all my dreams, everything that I'd ever wanted in life was gone. Like it was shattered. And the Lord kind of pushed me and said, "Go visit him at the gravesite." And I was like, this is not, I mean, some people are good with that. It was not my thing. And I went and I started looking around at all of the headstones. And I remembered a quote from Miles Monroe, which says, "One of the wealthiest places in all of the earth is not diamond mines, oil fields, or banks. It's the cemetery." Because he said in the cemetery lie dreams that were never realized, books never written, songs never written, businesses that never got started. And I looked and saw my husband's headstone and said to myself, wait a minute, even though we got the double headstone, there was a space for me. I was like, I ain't in that thing yet. And it kind of kicked this thing into me where like, I can dream again. Like, it's okay. Maybe my dream got shattered. Maybe the way I thought my life was going to be completely got flipped upside down, but I'm going to dream again. So I decided to just say, well, what is the dreams that lie in my heart for me and for my children? And because of that, I started pastoring the church where he was. So I actually do teach leadership now for people who are going through personal crisis and professional crisis. Like, how do we work through that? I started pastoring the church. We tripled the church. We quadrupled the income of the church. We met one of our largest goals was to get into a building because we were mobile for a long time. I raised up 7 new pastors and leaders within 2 years after him dying. And I was like, what in the world, God, is going on? It was only by the grace of God. But I realized that my dreams weren't done. Since then, it's been almost 15 years. I've written 6 books. I've just things that I could not have ever dreamed about before being with my husband, completely different now. And I'm not glad. I'm never glad that my husband passed, because he's still my best friend, still the love of my life. But I'm grateful to the Lord with how I've come out stronger, wiser, and better because of that situation. God didn't waste my grief.
I think that's such an important point because one of the platitudes people will say is, well, everything happens for a reason, or this was all in God's plan. And I don't think that's always the case. I think
No.
we have free will. We live in a broken world. And I think it's okay to say sometimes bad things happen. I
Yeah.
don't think your husband had to die for you to make a positive impact on the world. But I think it's such a beautiful and incredible thing to be able to say that you're going to take a tragedy and I'm going to take a tragedy. And instead of burying ourselves under our covers, which we have every right to do, I'm going to say, how do we make a positive impact? How do we take this and create something good out of it, even though it was something very bad? And I know I can think of so many widows right now that they're in that first 6 months, 1 year, 18 months, and they're thinking to themselves, it's what you're saying sounds so great and feels so impossible. And let's say you hadn't yet had that moment of being in the cemetery and thinking about your dreams. What would you say to somebody who's feeling like, oh, it's hopeless and I don't know if there's a future for me? Is there anything that you would share with them?
I would say it's okay to be where you are. I think so many times people are trying to pull us so quickly out of our grief that we don't have the time to properly grieve so that we can move on. If you're in those early stages, 6 months to a year, feel what you feel. Don't try to feel what people are telling you to feel. And one thing that used to make me mad is that people would say, well, you ought to be over it by now. I'm never going to get over it. I'm 15 years post having lost my husband. It'll be 15 years this October. So 14 and a half years, and I still ain't over it. I've got a new normal. I've learned how to live life in a different way, but I'm not over it. So that's kind of one of my pet peeves with people who grieve. Like, don't tell us to get over it. So I say, have your feelings and lean into them. Cry, experience what you're experiencing. I didn't have the ability to lay in the bed and not get out for a long period of time. I had a child who was 2 and just turned 3 2 days after his dad passed, and I had a 5-year-old. They needed to eat, they needed to go to school, and I needed them not to be falling apart, because if I saw them falling apart, it was going to be too difficult. So what I did was I took care of them. So if you're in that stage and you have children or you have responsibilities, get up and do what you got to do. Block off some time for yourself. When they went to school, I would take an hour or 2 hours and I just cry and I just be sad and I just look at pictures and I just pray and then I'd suck it up and I would get up and do whatever I had to do. Not everybody has the ability to just suck it up. Some people, they're just different and they have too many things going on and the emotions are too deep. Feel the feels. That's the only way you're going to get out of it. And I say it like this. If you've ever been downhill skiing, which I have, and I am awful at it, but I've done it. One thing that I had a person who mentored me, he was a widower and he was a friend of my husband. So when I became a widow, he grabbed me and was like, anything you need. But what he told me was, he said, if you've ever been downhill skiing, you know that when you look down that hill, it's big and it's scary. He says, whatever you do, don't lean back. Because if you lean back from the big and scary, it's going to be hard to get down the hill. He said, in order to go downhill skiing, in order to get down the hill, you got to lean in. So he was like, lean into your pain, feel it. Journal about what you're going through. Journal your feelings. Journal your emotions. Tell God you're mad. Tell God you're angry. Say God's big enough to handle all your emotions, but lean into that. Don't run away from it. So if you're 6 months to a year in, I would say do that. And biggest thing, don't make any major decisions, in my opinion, if you can avoid them. Sometimes you don't have a choice, but if you can avoid, don't make any major decisions during that first year because you're so emotional. There's a lot that's happening. You don't need to deal with it, but it's okay. After that year, not to say that this is the time point, change it. Then there's some things that we talk about how to lean in a more healthy way that you can do. But the first year, say go through it. Now, I'm not a grief coach like you, Emily, so you may have different way to get through it, but that's how I got through it. I leaned in, I let myself feel it, I let myself experience the hurt, and I would package it and say, here's my space to deal with it, and here's my space to handle my kids, and I would move on.
That is such a beautiful analogy, the downhill skiing, and I may have to credit you and steal it for future purposes, but you're so right. Like, it's very common in coaching. They'll say the only way out is through, and you cannot numb only certain emotions. Like, you can't numb yourself from feeling pain and sadness and be able to feel joy and happiness. That's just not the way that our bodies work. So it is important for people to be able to really lean into the pain, hold on to those things. And I just read a book, the Grief Recovery Handbook. And one of the things it said that I thought was really powerful is that when you're showing up and you're listening to people, and say somebody's sharing, and even it's painful and it's awkward and they're crying and they feel bad and you feel bad, is not to touch or hug them or do anything to break that moment, because touch interrupts emotions, thoughts, and feelings. And I hadn't thought about that before, because culturally we're so quick to comfort, to soothe, to tell people it'll be okay. We don't like for people to just sit in the sadness. But as I reflect, like, that's all I wanted somebody to do for me, is just let me be sad and not try to make me feel better.
It's kind of weird because I have a new principle that's come out of my grief journey. Now, like I said, I had lost my mom and my dad before. That journey was different than losing someone so connected to you as your spouse, but journeys nonetheless. Since I've gone through this journey with losing my husband, as a pastor, people think I'm weird, but I don't contact you until at least a week and a half to 2 weeks after the person's death. I'll have other people in our church contact you, but let me explain why. Because what happens is during that first week and a half to 2 weeks, everybody bring you food. Well, at least in the Black culture, we eat so much. I was like, but half the time you don't want to eat because you can't eat. But refrigerators are full of food. People come through the house left and right. People got issues with how you did this or that, and just all kinds of drama. And then 2 weeks after, you're left by yourself in that home with the empty space in your bed, and nobody is thinking about you or checking on you. They all care about getting through the funeral. They don't care about you got to now live a whole new life. So I wait to call just to listen, just to say, how are you? What do you feel? It's okay to feel what you feel, because people, and I don't think it's bad. I think people need to jump in and do those things in the first 2 weeks. It's not my place, because I feel like what I do is so much deeper. Like the calls 2 weeks after, 3 weeks after, 4 weeks, a month, 2 months after are, to me, more important, because nobody called me like that. Nobody picked up the phone. I had family, how you and the boys doing? It was always how you and the boys. Well, wait, can we just talk about how am I doing? Like, I am awful right now. And I know you care about my kids, but somebody needs to help me. And just dealing with my own personal experience, and still having to, by the way, the night my husband died, our board, the Lord called me to pastor, and our board said, we need you to run the church until we can figure out what to do. And then 2 weeks later, they officially hired me as the senior pastor. And I was like, I don't want to be a senior pastor. I didn't wake up in the world to say one day I'm gonna be a senior pastor. So I told them I'll give them a year, and then y'all can do what you want to. It's been almost 15 years. I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere. But the point of it was, you're not just dealing with your grief. You have children and they still have to go to school. They still have responsibilities, sports, all these different things. You still have to deal with finances, which the financial side of dealing with someone post-death, especially like in my case, because wasn't like he had been sick, or so it was in just he was fine that morning and died that afternoon. Luckily, we had a lot of stuff in place, but still working through all of that. Social Security and realizing like you got to go file Social Security. And I'm like, I ain't never did nothing with Social Security or the government like this. I don't know how to do this. Just all of these details. And you're planning a funeral. All these details, you're stuck in the moment and you have to do, but you're still feeling what you're feeling. And that's why you're in it. I think that's why the haze hits, because in order to get stuff done, I can't really deal with everything that's going on. It was 6 weeks after my husband passed before I really, really cried. I mean, I cried the first couple of weeks, but I mean like deep guttural, God, this is awful cry. And it was because I went away on a trip, took my boys, put them in daycare at the hotel for 4 hours, cried profusely for 4 hours, picked them up, went to the pool and act like everything was great. But I had to have that. And needing someone to sit with you, I didn't, my closest family members didn't know how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
They care, but they didn't know how. So that's why I think what you're doing is so important. Having a coach who could, when I went through this 15 years ago, I didn't know nothing about a coach who could walk me through my grief. I had not. So I would say use these resources. I've been reading your newsletters, Emily. They are so even if it's just, if you haven't subscribed to Emily's newsletter, subscribe, because her articles are so encouraging and it takes me back to places that I was when I was a widow. And I'm so glad she's writing them, because I couldn't find people to write stories about it. I couldn't find 15 years ago, there weren't people who were like, let me help you through being a widow. There weren't. I didn't know how to be a pastor. As a woman, I was a woman who was a pastor and a widow and a single mom. Now, the single mom, there was a lot more people I knew, but the other three, I didn't know anybody. So I mean, I was searching. So yeah, get the help. Go to Emily, write her, call her, get involved in her program, do whatever you've got to do. But we need help to get through this. And if you're dealing with something from a professional standpoint, for me, I had my personal crisis of I'm a widow, but I also now have a corporate crisis from the church. I'm dealing with grief in the church, and I'm dealing with leading an organization while I'm bleeding. And if you're dealing with that, then you reach out to me. Like, man, I'll help you deal with that, but she'll help you deal with the crisis of being a widow. I'll help you deal with how do you lead well as you go through these crises.
Thank you for that. And I did not pay Sheyna to say that, by the way. That was just her kind feedback, but so many good things to unpack there. I have just found that for whatever reason, especially culturally here in the US, we don't know how to deal with grief. I heard somebody say it like we live our life with our backs towards death until it comes around and slaps us in the face. And we don't know what to say or how to help. And you find this big gap between people who want to help and don't know how, and people who need the help and don't want to accept it or feel bad about asking for help. And it is those moments after that first 1 to 2 weeks where everyone goes radio silent. I was very fortunate. I had a couple of friends or acquaintances, and it was not the people I was expecting, who were very persistent and reaching out and asking and just doing, showing up, sending stuff, just letting me know, like, actively inserting themselves into my lives, because they knew like I was retreating. I was just trying to hold it all together. And I was working and dealing with 4 kids and trying to learn how to cook well for the first time, because my husband did all those types of things. And it's really challenging. So being there for someone, especially after those first couple of weeks, is so important. Just taking care of them, letting them process their own thoughts and feelings, especially in a role where you're taking care of other people. How did you do this, taking on the role of a church and leading that? I mean, how many times must you have thought, when's somebody going to take care of me? Or when is my time to deal
Ooh,
with all these challenges?
you know what, Emily? I don't know if I ever thought, when is somebody going to take care of me? I just felt like this is my life. I will be honest with you, and I've kind of feel like a prompting to just share this. One of the things I said after my husband died was because the pain was so great. And most people don't realize it's not just that this person has died. I've lost my best friend. I've lost my confidant. I've lost every hope of what I thought life would be like. I'm grieving a lot of different things here. This is Brave Widow podcast. I'm a Christian. I've lost my sexual partner. So all of that's gone. That's not necessarily the first thing you think about, but eventually you think about it. And one of the things I said that I tell every widow, please don't say this. And I know it's hard not to say it because I said it so much, is I said, I will never marry again. That's what I said. I was hurt so bad. And part of that was I didn't want to open up and let somebody else love me, but I didn't want to be hurt because here's the thing, everybody dies. So whoever I love again is going to die, which means I'm probably going to go through this again. I don't want to do that. So I don't ever want to do this again. So because of that, there were walls that I kept up that wouldn't allow people to get close to me. I'm not just talking about love interest, but I'm talking about people, period. Because I had been hurt by loving someone who left. And it's not like he left by choice. He died. So I was like, I can't even be mad. I didn't even know who to be mad at. I can't be mad at him. It ain't like he wanted to die. I can't be mad at God. I mean, I kind of want to be mad at you, God, but it's kind of like, I mean, everybody got a time to go. Like, who am I mad at? Like, and I was frustrated because I didn't know who to be mad at. And in the meantime, I'm going, but I still got to take care of myself. Because one thing, my brother was so amazing. He just kept saying, he's like, you cannot keep filling everybody's cup from empty. You have to take care of yourself. And so I did not, because of the walls, look to other people to fulfill those places. I'll be honest. So I would say be careful. Don't put these emotional walls up, because what happens with an emotional wall is you keep everybody out, and that's fine, but you also lock yourself in by yourself. It's hard. So what I did, I don't necessarily agree with all of it, but I started learning how to take care of myself. I was always very independent, but what I mean, take care of myself, I scheduled regular massages. Like once a month, I would get a massage, or I made sure I did pedicure and manicure. I've always liked to have my hair nice, so I wouldn't get my hair done. Just all the things that I felt like took care of me, I had to do on my own because I didn't feel like I had the emotional capacity to let somebody that close to me. I would say about 2.5, 3 years after that, I started opening my heart up and really got close to girlfriends. My girlfriends were that space, and taking time. I didn't want to leave my kids alone, so I didn't go out very much. But about 2 or 3 years afterwards, I felt comfortable leaving them with a babysitter and go out for a couple of hours with some girlfriends. But again, my kids were little, so it was a different story. But yeah, you really, even if you can't find somebody, you have to figure out how to love you. I had a trainer. I loved going to my trainer because there was just something about getting that. And it wasn't until after my husband died that with my trainers, I started boxing because I needed to punch something.
Definitely.
My trainers, I remember this one guy, he was like super big. He was one of my trainers. He's like, you hit harder than any 6'2" man I ever trained. And I was like, because I got a lot more in me, aggression and anger, than any 6'2" man you've ever trained. It's like that. It's just, you got to find something, even if you can't, if you have a friend, lean into that friend, spend time, make the time. But if you don't, take care of you. Make sure you take care of you.
Those are all great points. I mean, I think about physically the intimacy that you're missing, and your body goes through its own set of grieving. And yes, you can hug your kids and you can be affectionate, but it's so vastly different. So taking care of yourself and trying to help your body feel good, whether that's through exercise or massages or whatever that looks like, is really important. And from an exercise perspective, I really neglected that for a long time. I had every excuse in the book and have recently gotten back into the habit of working out. And I was actually talking to my coach earlier today again, and I was like, I just felt this big release. Like my body had just been tensed up and I was holding on to something for so long. And it's like, all of a sudden now I can breathe, and I've never experienced anything like that before. So that's definitely a huge tip for people. So I know people are going to want to know, how long was it before you felt like you may want to get remarried again, or you would be interested in dating again. And what did that look like for you?
God had to slap me upside my head and tell me, girl, it's time. That's what happened. Yeah, I was so like, I'm never getting married again. I did a little bit of online dating because I was bored and I was like, I would enjoy the companion of a guy, but I was like, I ain't trying to marry nobody. And then I did get engaged to someone. I met him, and 6 weeks later, he asked me to marry him. And I felt like, and I'm just being honest, I felt like, well, I should jump on this because who would want to marry somebody like me? I'm a widow and I have 2 kids and I'm a pastor. I'm not really your kind of gal people want to marry. And I had experiences where guys were really interested until they found out I was a pastor. And I was like, oh, but I will say this, guys weren't as turned off by having children. So if you have children and you're a widow, don't worry, guys are cool with that. It's not a big deal. But it was 11 to 12 years later. So 11 years later, I'm on a plane to a pastor's meeting in LA. I live in Northern California, so it's a short ride, but I'm talking and praying and like spending this great time with the Lord on the plane. And I sensed the Lord saying to me, Sheyna, it's not good for man to live alone. I was like, I know that. And he's like, I'm kind of talking about you. And I was like, what? Now, this is 11 years of being a widow, 11 years of being celibate, by the way. And so by this point, I've gotten my plans down. I don't watch certain things. I don't listen to certain things because I'm trying to stay, as I told people, I need to stay holy. But I left that and I was like, God, but I love ministry and I don't want to deal with the partner and all this. And God was like, you can do more. One can chase 1,000, two can chase 10,000. I was like, okay, interesting. We can do more together, but I ain't trying to hear that. I'm like, whatever, God, put that in a book, put it away. Go to the prayer meeting. They're praying. And this lady comes up in the middle of worship and she says, I feel like I have a word from the Lord. And I'm like, okay, good for you, girl. Preach that, bring it on. And she was like, some of you have said words out of your mouth that you have canceled what God has promised you he wants to do. And I was like, okay. And she said, there was a journal somewhere that you have written that wrote down what God promised you. And God says, go pull that journal out. And I knew immediately God was speaking to me because a year after my husband died, I wrote in my journal 5 things that God was going to give me. 4 of the 5 had come to pass. The 5th was a husband. He told me, he described him. He said he was going to be a certain height. He told me what his heart was going to look like, told him how he was going to love him, told him how he was going to treat my kids, how he was going to treat me, all these amazing things. And I just wrote it in a journal and I was like, I don't care. Now that was a promise from God. And what I learned is that I had to renounce my own words that I would never marry again and say, God, forgive me for speaking those words. I cancel those words over my life. A month later, the Lord put me on websites. A month later, the Lord told me to go to this specific website. I went to a specific website and Emily, he was fine. I was like, here we go. Now, so I met what would later become my husband. We met, dated for a year, we're engaged for 7 months, and we will be celebrating our 2-year anniversary coming up. But I could not believe that God would send me someone who, while very different than my first husband, I got over the idea that you only have one soulmate because I was like, I got to have a second one because you want me to marry God. And I found someone who is very different than my first husband, which is what I wanted. And yet so loving, so amazing, and another best friend. Like, it's just amazing to me. And he was a needle in a haystack, girl. Don't know, finding him online was hard, but I had to go to a specific site, yeah, because that's where God had him. But it was funny. Yeah, that's how that journey went. So it was a process. It took time. It's not something that I say get out and go do tomorrow. I have friends who are widows, and within a year they're ready to go back out there, but their stories are different. They had long-term illnesses, and mine was just different. Different people, different strokes, different folks. You do you. But make sure you just ask God to help you.
I think for me, I was definitely curious, like, what's out there? How bad is this going to be? We really devalue, I think, our own worth, right? Like, oh, we have all of this baggage. But if you think about it, there are so many people, especially in their 30s and 40s, that they've been through divorce. They have kids. First of all, you're not the only widow out there. But then secondly, I mean, everyone has a story by the time they've reached their 20s, 30s, 40s that you're not of less worth. And in fact, you have to be careful because a lot of times widows can be targeted online and there's all kinds of scammers. And that's going to be a whole nother episode. We may have to get this special website in that episode, Shayna, so we can include it for
I don't
people.
give out the website. I don't give out the website because it was one that was unique that God had for me.
Okay.
And I tell people, everybody asks me, what website did you find your husband? I have friends who found folks on websites that I thought the people were just trash on. So it is not really about the website. It's about you getting with God and trusting God through your journey of this new space of singleness and what that looks like for you. It was that God said it is her time. And this is where this guy I have for her is. It really is not caught up in the web. The website is great, and I've seen they're making matches. Like all of them are making matches. Everybody's making a match. It doesn't website don't matter. But I'll tell you, them Christian ones, those people look like they lived in their basement. I was like, their mama's basement. I was like, I'm good on that one. But
Well,
that's just a joke. That was just a little joke.
I've learned that Christian is a very broad term.
Very, very, very broad.
Yeah, and there's a whole smorgasbord in there.
Yeah, if you do decide to date as a widow, you have to move out the emotion out of dating. And I know that seems really weird. And you have to put in kind of like, I work in business. I'm an engineer. So I approach dating as an engineer and a business person, which was simply, let me watch you to see what qualities and characteristics you have as I get to know you. I'm not going to allow my heart to just go super all in until I know you got certain qualities. So I prayed. I told the Lord, I was like, I know he just coming from church because I met him on a Sunday after church. And he was looking all snazzy with his church clothes and stuff. And I was like, that's a good sign, but that don't mean he really know you, Jesus. So then I journaled and I asked God questions and I asked the Lord to show me. So it was very methodical. And it was I had questions, but I didn't ask him all those questions. I asked the Lord so that, because sometimes you ask people questions when you date and they give you the answers that they want you to have, but that's not really who they are. I took a business-minded approach. Let me make sure the things that I believe God has for me are there. Mm-hmm. And it took about 7 or 8 months for me to see and get all my questions answered. And then by then I was like, I'm good. Now I'm ready. Now I'm emotionally, I like him. I'm attached, but I'm not so attached that if we bounce, I'm not okay. It's like that.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah. So I think it's different than when you're in your 20s and you're just like, I love him. Now we got too much at stake. We've got kids' lives involved. I've got to protect my financial interest. I've got to protect my church. It's a little different. So yeah, dating Definitely. As a widow is a whole nother vibe.
Yes. Yes, it is, especially from what I've heard. So, all right, Shayna, first I want to say congratulations. You have accomplished just so much in your life, from your marriage to your church, to your business, to everything that you're doing. It is so inspiring, and I know that other people will really be inspired and motivated by your story. Do you have any final words of wisdom that you would share with us? And then if you'll just let people know, like, how do they find you? How do they work with you? What are the things that you do?
Yeah, I'm going to close with what I have developed is my it's a proprietary method for how you get through crisis and lead your organization to success. And the reason I want to close with this, because I think it's important for widows to know this, whether you're leading an organization or not, you're still leading a family. And that is my RARE method. And it's not spelled R-A-R-E, it's spelled R-A-I-R, RARE. And it stands for resilient, authentic, innovative, and relational. What I want to share with you is that there is some skills that you have had to deal with to be resilient as a widow. And oftentimes we forget about all the things we've overcome in the rest of our life. When you think about what you've been through, it'll remind you can get through. You're resilient, authentic, be you. Don't try to be anybody else. Don't try to figure out or do life like everybody. Don't try to grieve like this person or be the single parent like this person. You be you, and you trust God that in your authenticity, God's going to show you how to move through this situation. Be innovative. Look, y'all, the stuff we used to know, it don't work no more, because we I had to be innovative to learn how to take my kids. I have 2 kids who played sports and how to get them in their space. They both played the same sports at the same time on the same day. You have to be innovative. How do I get help? Where do I go? What do I do? Be innovative. And then relational. You can't do this alone. Find people who you can support. Find people who can support you. Find people who can invest in you. Find people who you can trust to take care of your kids and help you learn how to deal with finances. You can't do it by yourself. If you get through that and you understand, that's the way I train people to get through difficult crisis situations and lead their organizations well. You can do this. So you can find me if you're looking for me. It's real easy. Hit me up on Facebook. Just look up Sheyna James on Facebook. You can hit me up on Instagram. I think my Instagram handle is Pastor Sheyna, and you can hit me on my website, which is sheynajamesconsulting.com. I also have an amazing, again, that's sheynajamesconsulting.com, but I also have an amazing group of Christian women. I have a group of about 450, almost 500 women that we're just walking through what does it mean to lead well. So you can find that in our Facebook group. Just look up Christian Women Leaders in Facebook group. You'll see my picture. I'm there.
Awesome. Well, y'all, Sheyna is a pastor when she says she's going to close, and she does so eloquently. So we'll have all the links to where you can find Sheyna in the show notes. So you'll have those available to you. And she is an awesome woman. This is the second time I've had the opportunity, even briefly, to speak with her. And it's always a great experience. So Sheyna, thank you for sharing from your heart and your words of wisdom. I really appreciated having you on the show today.
Thank you so much, Emily. I am so grateful for this opportunity, but more than that, grateful for what you're offering to widows during this season of their life. I know it's desperately needed, and I pray that people will take advantage of your coaching services.
Hey guys, thank you so much for listening to the Brave Widow podcast. I would love to help you take your next step, whether that's healing your heart, finding hope, or achieving your dreams for the future. Do you need a safe space to connect with other like-minded widows? Do you wish you had how-tos for getting through the next steps in your journey, organizing your life, or moving through grief? What about live calls where you get answers to your burning questions? The Brave Widow membership community is just what you need. Inside, you'll find courses to help guide you, a community of other widows to connect with, live coaching and Q&A calls, and small group coaching where you can work on what matters most to you. Learn how to heal your heart, find hope, reclaim joy, and dream again for the future. It is possible. Head on over to bravewidow.com to learn more.